Recording oral history interview with William Confer, Alpha Company, 119th Armored Engineering Battalion.
That's it.
Recording at the 12th Armored Division Museum, August 15, 2008, as part of the annual reunion. Bill, I want to thank you for allowing me to interview you again.
Surely.
And starting again, before you entered the Army, what did you do?
I worked on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. I patrolled the track between, basically between Glenwood Springs and Bond, Colorado, which is, I lived at Cerro, Colorado, on the Rio Grande Railroad, and there was a 40-mile connection between the old Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and the Moffett Railroad that came through the Moffett Tunnel, Denver and Salt Lake Railroad. And now it's the main line, and they even shut down the rest. But I maintain, I had to keep everything in mind. I mean, the rails, the crossings, anything that was not working right or didn't, a lot of dugways, there'd be rocks rolled down in, and I had to move some of them off the track. And it was just a pretty thorough job of taking care of that 40 miles of railroad.
Oh, yeah.
So
Now, when the war started, or when you joined the Army, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted. I was 28 years old, and they were turning a lot of people out. And then all at once, they got awake and kept increasing the Army again. And if I'd have protested it, I could have continued working on the railroad, but I figured they'd eventually get me anyhow.
So your skills, engineering skills from the railroad, how did they notice and start applying that and figure that you should be an engineer?
Well, I don't really know, but except that I was more or less of an engineer on the railroad, not a locomotive engineer, but more of a mechanical engineer. I had to know everything about the rails and the signals.
Now, when you joined the Army, where did you go to basic training? Where did you attend basic training?
In the Camp Camel, Kentucky.
And did you go right from there to the 12th Armored Division?
Well, when I left Fort Logan, Denver, Colorado, I was already assigned to the Engineer Battalion, the 119th, and the 12th Armored Division. And it wasn't any railroad connection with what I was doing in the Army, but I had been doing mining in California and in Colorado, and knew all handling explosives, and so I guess they figured I'd be better join the engineers.
Now, Can you tell me about the training at Campbell and at Barclay? What kind of things were you doing?
We experimented with laying minefields, repairing bridges, or destroying them, or anything that the regular troops, and we had certain equipment all the time that would let us carry out, well, repairing bridges or destroying them one way or the other. So we got a lot of training and stuff that the Army figured to be part of what we were doing anyhow. And so, but so many of the troops that were in the outfit were just young men that had never had a job of any kind. And that, well, some of them took it up real well and some of them didn't. And I was a sergeant, squad leader. And that's what I never tried to go any higher than that. So, but we learned well, there were some things that the Army had their own idea how to do it, and we studied that and practiced it. And took basic training, I mean, rifle shooting and well, I guess that's about what you would call it. So, I was 28 years old, and at that time they were turning back, letting people out of there, not inducting them. And then all at once it changed, and so I went in the Army.
Yep. Now, once you got overseas, you know, after the training in Campbell and Barclay and over to England, what did you think of Tidworth Barracks and the situation when you were equipping to go overseas?
Well, we never had a whole lot of news what was going on there. We just kept practicing and rifle shooting and handling explosives. Well, we were we landed at Bristol, England, and spent some time up in Bedfordshire in England. We could see the planes going over to Holland, and we finally, when we left Bedfordshire, we went down to Salisbury, or Tidworth Barracks, down by Salisbury, England, and then went on when we left there to go to France. We went down to Portsmouth, England, and got on LST ship, landing ship tanks, and crossed the English Channel and up the Seine River to Rouen, France, and unloaded there and went to a little village called Alfay, and we spent Thanksgiving 1944 there, and the next day or two where we took off and went up through Soissons was one of the towns we went up through, and up to Luneville, France, Alsace-Lorraine, and we were there. Well, went up the Seine River to Rouen, and then to a little village called Alfay. And then we, after Thanksgiving was over, we took off up the Seine River, up through all the towns that had been occupied during the First World War, and ended up at Luneville, France. And
Now, when the Battle of Herlisheim began, what kind of duties were you asked to perform? Were you involved in the battle?
no, we were not involved in battle. We were building these treadway bridges. We had these big Brockway trucks, and they carried, I think they carried 6 12-foot sections of these bridges, and other trucks would carry supports that we put out in. We'd have to dig a base like on the edge of the canal and anchor it down with long spikes, pieces of rod, and anchor the end of the thing down, and then the boom truck would put a support out in the middle, or 12 feet out anyhow, and then they'd hang another section on it, and we had to we had little 6-man rubber boats, or whatever you want to call them, and would sometime we'd have to put 3 sections of bridge across them big canals over there. I think one of them was the Zorn River that come down out of southern Alsace-Lorraine and ran into the Rhine River, just right at this place called Herlisheim. We put about 3, I guess maybe 4 of them bridges in, and the tanks would cross over in, and they were out in the open over there. I mean, there was no shelter. It was just floodplain down on the west side of the Rhine River. And after we'd get a bridge built with it, next thing you know, there'd become a pretty heavy shell in there and disrupt it or break it or do something. They could see what we were doing from across the Rhine River and high ground over there. And we lost, I don't know, I think we lost about 8 men just while we were building them bridges. My truck got hit. There was what they call the Steinwald forest or woods in there, and I told to put my truck back out of sight. Well, it wasn't quite out of sight. The shell, 88 shell hit it and went through. We used to carry 3 5-gallon cans of gasoline on the side of the truck, like on the steps, And anyhow, that got hit and set on fire, and then had a number of crater charges, about 8, 9, 10-inch blocks of TNT. And after a time where it got hot enough and something, landmine or something, hand grenade, anything, whatever it was, caused that, all that TNT to set off, and it blew a hole big as this room in the ground. And I got stunned from the explosion, and the medical half track had come up, and they gave me a shot of something or other, and I ended up in Lunéville, France, in the hospital there. And wasn't hurt or anything, it was just that god-awful blast. More or less stunned me. I couldn't hear very much for a long time. But eventually they realized that they couldn't win there, and they lost about 80 tanks, I heard, and I don't know, around maybe 1,300 men were killed. And I don't know how many Germans, but so we pulled back out of there, the company did, to Senneval, France, and we resupplied ourselves there, and I guess in April we started out of there and went up through Luxembourg and up to a place called Trier, and grouped there again, and then we took off down through the Saar Valley and ended up at Mannheim, Ludwigshafen. It was a big industrial group of towns, and got together again, regrouped and resupplied ourselves, and then we took off east of there and ended up at Würzburg, Germany. And I guess part of our outfit tried to attack Schweinfurt, the big manufacturing town, and then they decided we went on down past Munich, and we stopped at a little town called Oberammergau, and they part of the one of the units of the 12th Armored went on, went clear down to Augsburg, Austria, but that, by then the war was over, and we were told to put our rifles away. And
now,
at Augsburg, that's where they held the Passion Play, and that's where we figured the war was over.
Now, once the war was over, how long did it take them to get you back home?
That was in May, and I we went to a little town called Allen, and out of there we worked from May till first part of September. The last part of August, I was a little blank on it, but we just spent the summer just resting more or less for a month or so, and then pretty soon they reinstituted basic training stuff, doing close order drill, and I worked at putting up a flagpole out of the top of a 3-4 story building, but then they had a point system, and I was assigned to a little medic battalion, and we moved away from Allen down to just north of Marseille, France, up on a mesa there, and I think they had a name for it. It was, I couldn't tell you it anymore, but we were up there till about the 16th of September. No, we got up there by that time. We were there till the last part of September, and then we loaded up on Victory ships. Ours was a Bardstown Victory, and we went out through the Gibraltar, and I guess I had trouble with the propeller shaft bearings, but it took us about 2 weeks, and that was in well, anyhow, we took out of there and went out a couple of days into the Atlantic, and then come back to Gibraltar, and there was nothing they could do there, so they turned us around. We went back over the Atlantic, and landed about the 5th of November, and I got on a train and came to Denver, Colorado, and I was discharged 11th of November, 1945. Came back to the University of Colorado and been living, well, we lived there, and then we lived in Gunnison, and then we moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, and lived there 22 years, and then moved back to the University of Colorado in 1978, and been there ever since. My wife died last July, a year ago now, and I've been living alone ever since. I'm 95 years old, and we've been married 66 years, so it, that's about as much of a story as I can tell you. Maybe if you have some questions, maybe I can answer them.
Actually, sir, I didn't have to ask hardly anything. You covered all of it. I thank you so much for your time and for letting me tape this so future generations can hear. Thank you.
Okay, so